Hi everyone, I'm Terrence Chu. I am VP of Product at Indeed, and I'm the executive sponsor of the Asian Network. Welcome everyone to this panel discussion. During this current environment, we really want to ensure that everyone at Indeed and our community is educated and supported in issues that the Asian community faces. It's more important than ever that we come together now to support each other, especially on issues of racism and xenophobia that's really cropping up these days more so than ever. Please feel free to ask questions using the Slido link that was provided in the calendar invite, and the panel will address these towards the end of the discussion. I just want to thank all the IRGs that have been supporting both the Asian Network and helping with COVID-related issues, including BIG, LIT, Women at Indeed, and iPride. And also, I want to call out huge thanks to the Asian Network co-chairs, Sharon Dinh and Howard Shin, for organizing this whole thing. And I will now hand it over to LaFawn, who's our VP of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Terrence. And that DJ was the way I want to start every day from now on. That was fantastic. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending the I Am Not a Virus panel discussion hosted by the Asian Network. And as Terrence mentioned, this has been going around. All the other IRGs are sharing, because at Indeed, we think of things not just hitting community by community, but intersectionally and with allyship and how we can support each other. So I'm very proud that we have a lot of IRGs that are actually joining today. Before we start, just a reminder, you probably heard it 3 times by now, you might hear it again. This event is being recorded, so we may use this internally, we may use this externally, but just so you all know. And I am going to read our panelists' bios because they are amazing and I don't want to mess it up. So I'm going to start with Dr. Russelll Jeung. He's a professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University. Regarding allegations of racism against the Chinese American community. Joanne Ramos is a novelist and an author of a national best-selling book called The Farm. A Filipina immigrant turned investment banker and staff writer for The Economist, Joanne eventually, her book, The Farm, pushes audiences to question the socio-political climate of society and broaches topics of xenophobia, widening inequality, stagnancy of middle-class wages, women's rights, and hyper-capitalism. I feel like there could be a whole panel on that. John Yang is the president and executive director of the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, where he leads the organization's efforts to fight for civil rights and empower Asian Americans through public policy advocacy, education, and litigation. John is a longtime leader in the Asian community. He has produced many publications on topics related to cultural studies and has conducted extensive research with Asian American communities. He's been interviewed and quoted often, recently including NPR Morning Edition, for his expertise, as well as for his work on a site collecting reports of racism against Asian Americans amid the coronavirus pandemic. And Amy Mok is founder and CEO of the Asian American Cultural Center based in Austin and president of the Asian American Community Partnership. She is deeply involved in community service locally and nationally, championing for social causes that range from education, cultural diversity, and women's health issues. Most recently, she has been an active voice in the Austin American and Pacific Islander community, having founded and chaired various organizations. And I think what we'll do is, because their bios are so amazing, I'm going to start with a question that actually helps expand their background and their experiences. So I want to make one more reminder about the recording, but also please use the Slido link to ask questions as you think of them during the panel. We'll have a few minutes at the end for questions that we already have, and then hopefully you all will add some more. So with that, I'd love to get started. And the first question I'm actually going to ask each and every one of the panelists, so get ready, is can you give us just a little bit of background? Your bios are amazing. You all have extensive experience in your field, but I'd love for you to give a little bit of background on just personally being Asian American, any adversities you've had to face and overcome, and any barriers that you felt like you face either now during this pandemic or in the past that's leading up to this. Let's start with Amy.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I was born in Hong Kong and is the youngest girl in our family. So if you can imagine, I was a very shy person, and being raised as a Chinese woman, we were told just to be heard and not, just to be quiet and not to be heard. So when I first came here in 1975, I didn't even know what do I want. So when people ask me a question about what do I want, I said, I don't know. I know what my parents want and my teachers want, but I don't know what I want. But I truly believe that one's journey has its purpose. So through my life journey, I met amazing mentors. My first one is an African-American lady in my psychotherapist formal training. And she actually told me this, and it really left me with a very deep impression. She said, Amy, you have to show up to grow up. So I didn't know what it meant in the beginning, but I have it in my mind. And then my first professor, my advisor in human service, and she realized how quiet I was in my class because it was a seminar and 50% of my grade depended on my class participation, and I was so quiet. And she called me to her office and I knew I was in trouble, but she told me, this is a life-changing statement. She said, Amy, your experience, she's not talking about skills or knowledge. She was talking about experience, and she's a Jewish woman. She said, Amy, your experience is just as important as everybody in this class. And without your participation, this class will not be the same. So what she was telling me is, my voice is going to make this class whole. So she gave me my responsibility and she held the place for me to value me in the participation of the class. So the rest is history. So I have not stopped talking and get involving and just show up so that I can grow up. So I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Amy. That was fantastic. Dr. Jeung.
Good morning, everybody. And I'd like to thank the Asian Network as well, and especially Sharon Dinh. I'm going to tell one story that just happened at the start of shelter in place. I'm Chinese American, and I was at a sporting goods shop with my 15-year-old son, and we got into line at the cashier 6 feet away from someone in front of us. And once that person saw us, he noticeably moved away and went to the other side of the counter. And both my son and I noticed it as it was so obvious. And we recognized, oh, people are shunning Asian Americans and purposely or maybe unconsciously avoiding us. At the same time, on the other cashier was a long line of people buying ammunition. And so that sort of struck me because we don't normally see people buying guns and ammunition, but combined, it's, for me, it just sort of cemented this idea, wow, Asians are now being seen as a threat or possibly the enemy, and people are arming themselves. So for me, it's just a matter of time when you connect those two ideas. If Asians are seen as a threat and the enemies and others are arming themselves, I think it might be a matter of time before someone is seriously hurt. And that's already been happening across the United States. Asian Americans are being targeted as threats and have been physically attacked. So that's my quick story.
Thank you, Dr. Jeung. Joanne.
Thank you for having me here today. I was born in the Philippines. My family moved to Wisconsin in the 1970s. And You know, it's funny, I think that generation of parents raised children mostly to assimilate. That's certainly how I was raised. I was raised to fit in. And my mother always told me, you're different if you feel different. So go out there, and it doesn't matter that something to you in school, like you let it roll off you, don't rock the boat, and you just keep going. And I think because of that, I've gotten very adept at straddling worlds. It's one of the reasons I was prompted to write this book, whether it was being probably the only Asian American family in our small town in Wisconsin when we first moved there, or being a financial aid kid at Princeton, or being one of the first women actually hired in a private equity firm that I worked for in Boston, and then being a mother from the Philippines, raising children with a lot more privilege than I had had growing up, hiring Filipino women who left their own children back home in the Philippines to raise my kids. And I found that I'm able to straddle those worlds in part because I've gotten very adept at omitting the parts of myself that make other people feel uncomfortable. Whether it's because I live in downtown Manhattan normally, that's not where I'm right at this moment, which is a very diverse place, or because I've gotten so good at omitting parts of myself to make everyone around me feel comfortable, I have almost forgotten about my race in the worlds that I move in New York, and my kids' schools. They're so diverse until this pandemic happened. And we are right now hunkering down in upstate New York in a town that I love that is much more conservative than I'm used to. There are a lot of Trump supporters. My butcher here, I have come to know them. They are big Trump supporters. We are still friends. We don't talk politics, but I have also had the same experiences as Dr. Jeung has had here. It is a consciousness that I have forgotten about in the 20 years that I lived in New York. And suddenly I found myself behaving the way I did growing up, which is just keep your head down. Just don't stand out. My mom taught me, she's a great mom, but she did teach me the tall grass gets mowed. You don't want to be the tall grass. And I'm feeling some of those things again. And that's a very uncomfortable place to be, especially when I have young children that I'm taking around. So.
Thank you so much, Joanne.
Sure.
John.
Great, thank you. And thank you for all of you guys for hosting us. It's a great opportunity to talk and really share experiences. Certainly, I have unfortunately had a number of the same experiences as Joanne and Dr. Jeung. Just a little bit about myself. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've been privileged in the sense that I've been a partner at a law firm. I've worked overseas in Shanghai for 6 years as the regional general counsel for an American company. And then I was a political appointee. But yeah, for the Obama administration. But actually what animates me, and certainly what causes me to do the job that I do right now, is the experience I had growing up. And part of that experience was the fact that I was an undocumented immigrant. You know, most times when people talk about undocumented immigrants, they think of the Latino faces, which they should, because if you look at undocumented immigrants, the large proportion are Latino immigrants. But as all of us know, there are many Asian immigrants that were undocumented as well. And my story is many of those, which is, you know, we came here on a work visa. And when that work visa expired, we had a choice to make, or my parents had a choice to make. And, you know, they were very courageous. My brother and I were 11 and 9 at the time. And they knew that for us to go back to China made no sense, would have been really hard for us as kids. And so they just, and always stopped me as to sort of wanting to find a way to continue to give back to the community in the work that I do. So I'm really pleased to be part of this discussion today.
Thank you so much, John. And as you all know, we're here speaking really about what's happening in this country, xenophobia, racism. For those of you who joined the panel, we had a great kind of conversation yesterday. There's xenophobia, there's racism, there's ageism, there's socioeconomic disparity, there's all sorts of things happening right now. But I would love from your perspective, why do you think that xenophobia and racism is happening right now against the Asian community? Yes, we know there's COVID-19, the coronavirus and all of that, but why do you think these things are surfacing right now? We'll start with Joanne.
So, you know, as I'm coming to this issue with a very different perspective than my co-panelists, in that I'm a writer. But I deeply believe that words matter and that stories matter. that the stories we tell ourselves frame how we see the world and what's acceptable in the world and what we feel is acceptable in the world. And I think that's just not on the individual level, it's on the level of the nation. The story that we tell ourselves as a nation defines who we consider American, who we consider belongs, and how we treat the people within it. And I think clearly the story of America has changed over the centuries, but in the past years, it's changed a lot. There's a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric. There are travel bans. There are white supremacists who feel comfortable rallying and no one condemning them, not just for the hatefulness of it, not just for the racism, but for the fact that that's fundamentally un-American, that narrative of America, I believe, the white supremacist narrative of America. So you take this story that's changed, where there's a true us against an outsider them, whether that encroachment from that them are Mexican rapists or immigrants, or this pandemic, this virus, this China flu. It's this idea of encroachment on a true America that is not the America I at least believe in. Now you layer on top of that the fact that China, where the virus started, is the primary great power rival of the US and has been for a while, and we're in an election year. And so this is getting so politicized. I almost think it's not surprising that this is happening now. And then if you layer on top of something I've been told too many times in my life, which is I can't tell you people apart whenever someone confuses me for another Asian woman. So even if it's an anti-China strain of politicization that's happening, it becomes a blanket racism because of, I think, a strain of racism against Asian Americans that isn't often as called out as much as other forms of racism, in the sense that I feel like in some ways the Asian minority is not seen as American as maybe some other minorities. There's a foreignness to the Asian community, a strain of that kind of racism that still exists and has existed for some time. So it's almost a perfect storm, I think.
Thank you, Joanne. Dr. Jeung, how do you see this?
I think Joanne's correct. It's the politicization of the virus and the insistence of the current administration calling it the Chinese virus. It's really strategic on their part to rile up their base and to deflect blame. And so when people conflate the virus with Chinese people, and you see media representations often showing COVID-19 with Chinese people with masks, people see these repeated representations, and especially on social media. So what happens is that ingrained in their thinking, the virus is associated with Chinese people. And so then they have this implicit bias and a racial profiling process where they automatically assume, oh, an Asian may be more likely to be infected, and Asian businesses may be more likely to spread the disease. And people are making automatic assumptions about us. They're racially profiling us now. And like Joanne said, they can't tell Asians apart. And so what's happening now isn't surprising to me. We knew it was going to happen because in past history, Asians have been blamed for epidemics, and subsequently they've been harassed, vilified, and then had political legislation passed against them. And that's what's happened today. We have an immigration ban that has nothing to do with the virus, but is loosely connected.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And I think, you know, it's such a scary time with kind of all of these things presenting themselves in the middle of a global pandemic. Like, we don't have enough to worry about. And unfortunately, xenophobia itself isn't just isolated towards Asians. We're seeing cases in, you know, places in Asia against Africans during this time, kind of blaming them for the virus. So it feels like xenophobia is coming from fear and blame. Like, everyone wants someone to blame in some way. How do you feel like xenophobia, so we have what's happening in America, but we have something that's happening across the world as well. How do you feel like xenophobia presents itself in a pandemic, and why? I'd love to hear from John.
Sure, thank you. It's a good question, and why it manifests itself, you hit upon it, which is it's the fear. There is an element of fear that everyone has, and unfortunately, what we also have right now is this growing sense of nationalism that we've seen in many countries. and particularly among leaders of many countries that seize upon that fear and use it to their advantage. And what that results is that racism that you're talking about. So in that sense, it's not surprising. I think the one thing I would add on to all of that is that, unfortunately, I don't think this is going away anytime soon. Whether it's some of the racism and xenophobia here in the United States against the Chinese Americans and Asian Americans, because we're going to have that ongoing geopolitical struggle, if you will, between the United States government and the Chinese government. And I always say, government is not really about the peoples here, right? It's about these dueling governmental systems, dueling economic systems that has this ripple effect on all of our communities. But then we also, you're absolutely right. You see what the Chinese government is doing against sort of African patrons, African immigrant patrons at McDonald's. You see some of the same strains in Italy or in Brazil. So unfortunately, this isn't going to go away anytime soon. And I think part of it is for all of us to address that rise in nationalism as a whole. And how do we deal with that, grapple with it, and talk about it like we do here. So in a way that's thoughtful, in a way that de-escalates these issues and breaks it down in a way that people could say, wait a second, you know, we share so much more than we have that divides us. And let's not let these forces pull us apart somehow.
Thank you, John. Amy, any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think the reason is, a lot of it is because of lack of information about the differences between our cultures. I think when it was started, it was talking about eating wild animals. So I think from that twist, it really demonized the Chinese culture, that we have a different social convention that is very different from the Western perspective. So that is the first, from Wuhan, because the virus started suspected is from a wet market. And a lot of people do not understand that 95% of the people in China actually go to wet market every day. And that is in our culture, So, and that lack of experience, knowledge about the social convention in the Chinese society, and then take it to another level, is about these people are so different, and they are the cause of all this, pandemic from happening. And so I think that cultural difference play a very important part in this. And then of course, because of the economic rivalry between China and this country, then the label become a political football, for people to manipulate so that they can mobilize, their camp. But what it is really disappointing is the lack of responsibility and insensitivity of elected public officials to understand labels, words hurt, and especially hurting children. I'm just so grateful that we have all these dialogues, in the community to combat, to really mobilize good people and to summon our own humanity, that this is not acceptable. So I'm hoping that this will continue and will continue until we all get it. So it is really about understanding the culture and understanding that all Americans in this country should deserve the same protection of our safety. And just because we are facing with fear doesn't mean that we have to lose our humanity.
Thank you, Amy. Dr. Jeung, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about the website that you helped launch and the learnings from it today.
Thanks. So with two civil rights organizations in California, Chinese for Affirmative Action and the Asian Pacific Planning and Policy Council, we started a website where we could collect firsthand accounts of the incidents that people were experiencing. We knew from Asian American racist history that with a pandemic, Asians will be scapegoated and they'll be targeted. And so we knew early on, and we asked the government, you better start collecting reports. Our government didn't, and so we had to, do it on our own. And again, it's part of Asian American history that Asian Americans have always had to resist racism and discrimination. We were doing it again. We collected thousands now of incidents, and we're using these incidents to develop community responses, to help kids who are bullied, to help people facing workplace violations, to help people who are experiencing hate crimes. And so we're also collecting the data. Again, 15 to 20% are actual physical assaults. People are getting spat and coughed on a lot. And that's both dehumanizing and insulting, but it's also a public health threat at this period. And in the East Coast, one white person got arrested for terrorism for coughing on produce and the white cashier. But Asian Americans are getting coughed on daily across the nation. And so we're sort of experiencing mass terrorism right now. And so we're calling on the government. So we're using our data to develop a collective voice and to challenge the government and holding the government accountable, safeguard public safety. We have the right to safe accommodations, to access to goods and services, but people are being harassed at schools, at parks, and at stores. And so it's not our problem, it's other people's problems with us, right? This isn't an Asian American issue, it's other people's racism. And so that's why we're calling on government and actually the American public to actually take a stand and address it.
Thank you, Dr. Jeung. Joanne, so you are a novelist, you're a storyteller, and earlier you kind of talked about, the story that Americans are telling ourselves and kind of what America maybe has always been versus the story that we tell ourselves that we are, right? About the country specifically. But I'd love for you to dive in a little bit deeper around, you mentioned in the community where you were, it was very diverse. You hadn't really you could kind of forget about all of this stuff that's happening because it wasn't happening necessarily in your community. But we talked about a little bit yesterday, like the model minority and how that theme itself could be lent to why some people think, oh, Asians don't really experience racism, right? We don't even think of that. We think of maybe in the US, the Black and Brown communities as experiencing more racism. And I think the model minority theme has something to do with that. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how you think about that?
I do. I was really surprised when I went to Princeton University, and I was surprised when people would feel very comfortable saying that to me. Oh, well, you're one of the good ones. You're a good minority. And I'd never heard that and didn't like it, but couldn't quite articulate as an 18-year-old why, because these people meant it as a compliment. I think because the criminal justice system and until recently, maybe many types of employment, discrimination, those sort of things weren't targeted, broadly speaking, against Asian Americans as they are against other brown communities. I think people can think that racism against Asians isn't as real or as prevalent. But as Dr. Jeung pointed out, there is a long history of it. In fact, the Asian American Writers Workshop has an incredible sort of online display of posters and booklets from the late 1800s showing the prevalence of racism against, at first, the Chinese Asian community and then Asian Americans and sort of more broadly throughout time. Most of my friends are sort of my educational other background. I've had a number of them tell me with this pandemic how surprised they are to see this sort of racism because it has never existed before. And I think that's a dangerous conception. Even the idea that people would say to me so often in my life, I can't tell you apart from someone else, you guys all look alike. That is a form of, it's not seeing someone as an individual, that is racism, right? I also think it's hard to change the story of who is American when you think of people with eyes like mine as one homogenous mass. And I think that story is starting to change with representation in Hollywood and stories and TV shows. But I think it's more than legislating against, we need legislation to protect minorities, but I think it's more than that. I think it's changing truly the narrative of who we are and what we're supposed to look like and what we stand for and if we're in it together or we're not. And that starts with leadership. You could tell a story about this pandemic that it's not pitting us against them. You could tell that story and it would have an impact. That is not the story our leaders are telling. And it is not a surprise this is happening when that is not the story that's being told.
Thank you, Joanne. John, can you tell us a little bit more about the initiatives that the AAJC is proactively working on and supporting right now?
Sure, thank you. There's a few things. I mean, because as Russelll has pointed out, there has been this tremendous rise in anti-Asian hate that we've all seen. And it's interesting, our organization likewise tracks these incidents, and you know, we're very, very disturbed by it. So there's a couple of things that we've been trying to do. First is something to which Joanne spoke of, which is really speaking to the media, speaking to policymakers about the fact that words matter, using the right terms matter. The fact that Chinese flu, Chinese virus doesn't add anything to the medical scientific knowledge, but what it does add is harm to our community. So it's an easy cost-benefit analysis and trying to get that message across. The media, frankly, has gotten pretty good at that. I mean, they get that message. But the problem is, unfortunately, some of our policymakers choose to ignore that. Now, I think the panelists have rightly recognized that they have political motives to do that. And so we can't expect that to change. But what we can do is continue to call that out and continue to about using those right terms. So that's number one. Number two is we started to do what's called bystander intervention training. So if you're someone that sees an act of hate that is taking place, whether it's on the subway or in the street, you know, there's oftentimes little things that you might be able to do that could de-escalate the situation or make the situation a little bit better. Now, first thing I always say is we are not asking anyone to be a superhero. We are not asking people to put themselves in a space that they are not physically safe. But, you know, if you're on a subway and you see someone that is just cursing an Asian American, if you feel comfortable doing so, you might just stand next to that person, to the victim, and say, hey, are you okay? Can I help you? Or you might get someone to go find, you know, the local transit authority, police officer or law enforcement agent, right? Bring someone to the scene, so to speak, right? Help that person get to a place of safety. Even if you just stand next to that person, it lets the victim feel a little bit more protected, help reduce, it won't eliminate, but reduce some of the psychological trauma involved. And that can go a long way. So we started doing these trainings about 2 weeks ago. Already we've had over 2,000 people, quote unquote, trained. You know, it's just the first step though. I mean, there's so much more that can be done. And I think the last thing is exactly what you guys are doing here, which is having these types of conversations where we have an opportunity to talk. Really talk also cross-culturally. I think that's also important because, you know, frankly, I'll be the first to admit it. Asian Americans have not always been great at standing in solidarity with African Americans, Latino Americans at times. And now we are certainly asking for them to stand in solidarity with us. So I think this is a moment for our community, the Asian American community, to really also be better citizens, be a better community members in working together and crossing some of those racial cultural divides that have at times unfortunately separated us.
Well said, John. Well said. And that's also why we like to think of this work as intersectional, because we are all in this together. And if our communities all support each other against hate, against racism, xenophobia, against white supremacy, against all of those things, then it only makes us better if we stand together. So thank you so much. That was very well said. Amy, I would love for you to talk to us about what the Asian American Culture Center is doing today in response to COVID-19. It sounds like it's also been acting as a voice for the Asian community.
Yes, we are 20 years old. 20 years ago, we found a home, you know, for the Asian American community, and we serve as a bridge between the East and the West. So we have earned the trust and the credibility from different Asian communities, because Asians are very diverse. They all come to celebrate with us at our different Asian festivals. And because of that trust, when violent incidents happen to some Chinese families and individuals, they feel comfortable to come in and share their story stories with us. And I was actually interviewed very early on by the Austin CBS about my thoughts in the label and how our community felt about it. And I actually, voiced the concern that I said, well, labels are important, words are important, and we need to be sensitive and more caring about using those words and labels. I actually get an email telling me that I'm the troublemaker. So it really set me back. So when I was told about those stories, those violent incidents about individuals in our community, I actually had to think for a few days before I brought it up to our city leadership about what had happened, in our community. So I guess what is important that I would like to really impress upon any individuals, that when people have not found their voice, it is important for us to exercise our voice on their behalf, because it is important for policymakers to hear about our stories. And so because of my relationship, I guess, with the policymakers at the city, I'm on the arts commission. I'm an art commissioner, appointed position by my council member. So I have the I guess the credibility to bring those stories up to their attention. So on April 9th, they were able to make a public action and to pass a resolution publicly to condemn violence against the Asian American community and mobilize good people in Austin, to stand with us. So I think that is really significant. And I'm hoping, I know every big company, including Indeed, might have policies against racism or the isms. But I think at this time, it is important to really make a public statement about your community, about Indeed community, and how we acknowledge the experience of Asian Chinese members are experiencing, the racial attack, and acknowledge that. I think that's important to first acknowledge it, and also to remind everybody about your company policy that you won't accept, any type of ism, against that community because of this pandemic. So I think it is very important that each one of us should be empowered ourselves to first speak up. And if you cannot do it at this time, at least for those of us who have found our voice, to be able to speak on behalf of those who have not found their voice. And also what is important is how important it is for good people to be our allies. I actually have heard from friends that I haven't heard for 10, 15 years. And when they heard this attack of our community, they actually call me, email me and said, what can we do? Can I just go with Chinese families to go shopping with them, grocery shopping with them? Because many of our Chinese families or Asian families are afraid to go even grocery shopping. They are doing a lot of shopping online for those who can afford it, and that, I think that is limiting our civil rights. Yeah, yes, we can go grocery shopping, but then we don't feel safe about doing it. So I think as a community, we all need to take responsibility to protect the safety of the vulnerables. But for now, the vulnerables are the Chinese and the Asian American folks in our community. So I think we need to do something to make a more public statement so that we can balance whatever racist labels that people trying to incite people who have already think that Americans are only white people's country, So I think there's a lot we can do. And I think John is right, that I think we should build coalition between all people, you know, especially people who have been oppressed. They will, you know, the Black and the Hispanic community and the you know, LGBTQ women, because I truly believe everybody has experienced oppression because we were a child before. You know, we all remember as a child how it was when we were not recognized, you know. So I truly believe everybody understands what oppression is about. So I think we need to really empower ourselves to summon our humanity and just, you know, claim back our caring and kind community, our country. Because this is what this country is about. I did not choose this as my country because it is an uncaring, because I will be treated as a second-class citizen, because I understand the Constitution. I understand the value of this country, that everybody should be treated equal. And that is our value, and that we need to practice.
Thank you, Amy. I'm going to go directly into Q&A using the Slido link that, since I'm talking to Indeedians, that you all have. There's actually been a number of questions added while we've been doing the panel. So I'd love to jump into that. So hopefully we can answer as many questions as people possibly have. And just to know, we had, I think at peak, about 400 people on the panel, which has been great. And they've come from lots of different communities. So lots of our inclusion resource group communities joined this panel as well. And so some of them have questions about allyship. And that's actually the first voted up question, which, and John, you were talking about this. So I'd love for you to give maybe a few more tips on what are the things that all of us can do to be allies and support the Asian community right now in light of the pandemic and resulting biases.
Sure. One thing is actually for people that are not Asian, to just ask your Asian friends, hey, are you okay? You know, because chances are, and you just heard it even from this panel, chances are they've had one of these types of encounters. And just being able to talk about it, just having someone share in it is useful. Just like sort of, I apologize if I'm being politically incorrect about this, but is just as sort of, if someone who has cancer appreciates it when a friend asks them, hey, how is that cancer treatment going? It is useful here in the same way. It's just the ability to share is a good way to be an ally. And, you know, it's interesting. I think Amy hit upon something else that I think can be useful, is especially for those that do feel a little bit afraid to go outside. If there are little things that can be done, whether it's to go to the supermarket, whether it's something else, offering that is another way to be an ally. I think that's absolutely right. Just checking in, you know. I mean, and these are tips that are, I think, useful in this context of anti-Asian hate. But I do want to emphasize that it is broader right now than that, as we're all practicing physical distancing and trying to maintain those social connections. We could use these same tips to make sure that we're connected with all of our friends and colleagues. Because I think all of us, it's hard at times, right, to feel like you're connected to the society as a whole, except for your immediate family that you're sheltering in place with. So I would broaden that in that way.
Thank you, John. Dr. Jeung, would you like to add something about allyship?
Yeah, so I really do appreciate these interventions on a community level and on an individual level, interpersonal level, to be allies to help and support Asian American individuals. But for me, the larger national level, the national level of discourse and the political animosity, the China bashing, is something that is actually causing this issue to be so pervasive, to be a nationwide issue. And so I think we need to address it on that level as well. And so for me, allies would be really helpful if we actually used our voice, like Amy talked about, and actually voted your conscience and voted to fight racism, to vote out people who use hate, to vote out people who use nationalism as a way to make their nation great again. And so it's good on an individual level, but racism is structural. Racism is institutional. We're seeing racist policies being institutionalized, like a ban on all immigration, because all immigrants are carrying dangerous invisible diseases. It's clear this is, COVID-19 is exposing the structural racism of America. You know, African Americans have higher rates of infection. Hispanics are more economically hard hit. Asians are being scapegoated. The Navajo Nation also has high rates of infection. So actually, I don't want the America that we sort of had in the past. I don't want to go back to normal. I want this to actually be a wake-up call for America, for Americans to sort of challenge what was normal about racism. And, you know, for Asian Americans who are surprised at this racism, if you took ethnic studies, you would realize, no, this racism has been, you know, structuring our lives, that we've been racially profiled all our lives with us being unaware. And so we need allyship on the individual level, but we need allyship on the political level. And that's really significant. I think it starts from the top down. Like Joanne said, it's the national discourse, the national narrative is that we should hate others so that we can feel good about ourselves. And I don't think that's appropriate.
Oh, we need 2 hours for this panel. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. And actually, since we're going there, let's go here. Joanne, Andrew Yang wrote an op-ed that Asian Americans should embrace our Americanness to combat racism. How can we do this without being forced to prove we belong?
It's funny, you know, it's a little bit like after 9/11 when George Bush, trying to help, I think, singled out the good Muslims. And a lot of my Muslim friends felt the burden of being that good Muslim and showing the world that they're not terrorists. I will admit, again, because we're hunkering down in an area that's very conservative, I felt, so I would volunteer anyway to deliver groceries, but I try to make myself very visible when I do it here. So I am playing someone in that, but it's sort of to Dr. Jung's point. I think all of these individual actions are important, if unfair, to put the burden on representing your ethnic group to the world. I think my African-American friends feel it all the time, quite honestly. They felt it at Princeton. They felt it when they spoke up every time. I mean, that's not something peculiar to the Asian American community right now. I feel it as a Manhattanite who escaped Manhattan in a rural area. Like I'm not going to be the jerk who's at the grocery store buying 3 pounds of hamburger meat because I don't want people to think, so I think that happens. But as Dr. Jung said, I really do think it's not enough. And if in the rubric of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, if pre-pandemic was the thesis and this is the antithesis, what is the synthesis that we create from this? I mean, this pandemic has shined a very harsh light on so many of the schisms, whether it's racial and the wealth inequality. These essential workers, are they going to still be essential to us once we've moved on? Are we even going to think about the Filipino nurses and grocery store stuff? I mean, and so this is a terrible moment, but it can be a clarifying moment if we take what we're seeing now for the first time, maybe, or more of us. I think all of us on this panel think about this stuff all the time, but for other people seeing it anew, what do we take from this into the post-pandemic world? And that has to be, to Russell's point, I think it's got to start from the top. It's got to be voting, it's got to be structural as well as individual action.
Thanks, Joanne. John, did you have something to add?
I do. I have to admit, Andrew Yang missed the mark, in my opinion, on that. And I think, to his credit, he apologized later and said that he thought he missed the mark as well. Look, the burden is not on the victim to prove our Americanness or to prove that somehow we belong. His analogy in particular to the Japanese Americans in World War II was particularly unfortunate. And basically he was saying you could to avoid incarceration in your own country, look at these people that decided to fight and shed their blood in another country. That's what we should be doing. That doesn't make sense, right? And again, I think he did say that he realized he missed it, but the point is definitely, that I would want to make here is that the burden is not on the victims. The burden has to be on the oppressor or the aggressor to say, hey, why are you doing this? And let's talk about that racism rather than just simply upon all of us to act more American. I mean, the reality is, as I think a number of our panelists have said, there's no way we can act more American. And by our sheer looks, for some people, we are not American. And that's the problem.
Agreed. Amy, I think you're raising your hand. Go for it.
You know, it is really disturbing for Andrew to make that statement, but it goes so deep into this, buy into this model minority belief. What was he talking about being more American? Does it mean more white? You know, and I think that's what he implied. And that was really disturbing to me. I'm glad he apologized, because I'll get on his case. Because that is how we buy into how people's condition put on us. And not everybody, you have so many variables, you know, in our community. And what does it mean being a model minority? So I think that needs to be dispelled. And the second thing that I wanted to stress is that people need to acknowledge there is a discrimination against Asian Americans, because a lot of them are still in denial. They are still thinking that, well, if I become a model minority, then I will not be discriminated against. But if you look at all the executive directors, you know, in all the big companies, how many Asian do you see? You know, so again, that myth has to dismiss, and then we have to acknowledge there is a discrimination, a racism among, against Asian Americans. And as painful as it is when we are dealing with this Asian hate against us, but this can be a wake-up call for our nation, that good people need to stand up and step in and just say, this is not who we are. Let's look at the values of our country. Let's look at our Constitution, you know, and yes, go out and vote and take back the country. But more importantly, we need to educate. I think we need to educate people, tell our stories, put up the mirrors to let people see our pain, our hurt, and they are real. They are not fiction. These are real stories, and children are hurting. And, you know, and if we don't do something about it at this time, what is going to happen to our country from generations down the road? We need to wake up and start taking responsibility, you know, from this generation on. And so I think this is a good wake-up call. And we have an opportunity, and I really thank, you know, Indy and all the big companies that are really addressing it. And I'm so grateful for the Asian American network in your company and in all big companies to really summon their voice, summon their courage, and find allies within your community to help take back our country, take back our humanity, because that is what America is about. That's why there's so many people wanted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Lastly, Dr. Jeung, did you want to add to this conversation?
Yeah, it's this idea of trying to be deserving or meriting anything, I think, is a dangerous sort of capitalist utilitarian way of thinking that, oh, certain people need to merit becoming American. The people we allow into the country need to be useful to our economy. And I think from the Asian American family value sense, I think everybody is part of our family and everybody should be valued. So if you believe in Asian American family values or American family values, everybody is deserving of dignity. Everybody is deserving of respect. And so you shouldn't harass, you shouldn't attack, you shouldn't name call. It's just sort of human decency. So this call that we need to be more deserving is, to me, irrelevant. What we should be calling people to is human decency and empathy.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Jeung. It's wrong, and it is, you know, this concept that to belong, it is conditional, right? To be American is conditional. And it's interesting because we are a country that is Asian American, African American, Hispanic American. It has to be hyphenated, right? In order to belong, which I think is an interesting concept that we deal with every day and maybe don't even recognize it, but that alone makes us separate each other. Are we American, or do we all have hyphens to prove that we are part of this, this country? So thank you so much, Dr. Jeung, John, Amy, Joanne, amazing panelists, amazing discussion. I feel like I could talk to you all day. The questions you all that were coming in on Slido, you all pretty much covered all of those. So that was also great for all of our people that are going to be watching this panel. Really want to thank the leaders of the Asian Network. They have been instrumental in bringing this voice up. So even though we are a company that absolutely is against all of the isms and the phobias, insert those words there, they definitely bubbled up their voice to say, hey, can we make sure that we are talking about this particular issue of xenophobia and racism against the Asian community at this time. Incredibly courageous. And even though the reception was great, I am very, very proud